So this is a first attempt of what we'll call our CyberCast hallway talks. And what we're trying to simulate here a little bit is the experience that you typically get at the real conference in a speaker room. The great thing about the speaker room at the SANS conference is that you have all these great instructors there. And if something new happens, they usually know what is going on, and you sort of can get great information right there. And we'll simulate this here a little bit with Didier, who is joining me here today. So Didier, the last thing we really needed now is another Windows Saturday, for there's an exploit already going around, but no patch.
So that we have something to do when we're confined at home.
Yes, give something to do. How serious is this thing? Like, do they say it's exploited, remote code execution? Anything you can say that makes it less serious?
Indeed,
kind of?
but targeted attacks. It's not widespread, but Microsoft has observed targeted attacks, and that's why they created this advisory.
So really nothing to be worried about the next couple of weeks or so, or?
If you're up to date, not really, because if you have Windows 10 and it is up to date, your Windows 10, then actually the code that might execute remotely is executed in a container. So in an app container, the thing is that we are dealing with a vulnerability that is exploitable in the Adobe font type 1 manager. Okay, now the name is Adobe, but it is part of Windows, and it is part of Windows for systems that are still running for the moment, starting absolutely from Windows 7. So that we are sure Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10, they are all vulnerable. And this is actually code that used to run in the kernel. And it's only with later versions of Windows 10 that it doesn't run in the kernel anymore, but it runs in a sandbox, in an app container. And that is why Microsoft, in its first release of the advisory, said, okay, the mitigation, if you have a Windows 10 version that is supported, the mitigation is that the code can only execute in an app container with limited privileges.
Okay, so, and there was also some confusion with this atmfd.dll in that first advice, so, right? They cleared it up a little bit, right?
Indeed. So now Microsoft, well, when I woke up, I saw that Microsoft had updated its advisory. It's now at version 1.1, and it's more clear about the DLL, the atmfd.dll. So that is actually the parser, the font parser that was running inside the kernel. And one of the workarounds that Microsoft proposed was to rename that DLL and then restart your system so that it is no longer loaded in the kernel anymore, and of course then that it cannot be exploited. Now that is something you can do for Windows 7 and Windows 8 or the very first versions of Windows 10. If you have more up-to-date versions of Windows 10, then that DLL might still be present, but it's no longer used. So it's no longer running in the kernel. It's actually now the font driver host.exe, where all that code runs. And that is something that runs in userland in an app container. So not only in userland, but also in an app container.
On the other hand, that workaround of renaming atmfd.dll it's really meaningless for current up-to-date version of Windows 10, because indeed, even if you have that DLL, it doesn't really do anything.
No, indeed. So if you look at Microsoft advisory, they say, okay, starting from version Windows 10 1703, the DLL is present but is not used. That's what they say. Now, I have observed in my virtual machines that actually the DLL was still present until version 1803, but it is not used. I made a small test with a test font file, and I could see that was actually parsed in the font driver host and not by that DLL. So there might be some confusion. So the way that I was able to figure that out is that I have a lot of virtual machines with Windows 10 installed. And what I typically do, I put a screenshot of that on my Twitter feed today. What I actually do, each time that I make an update of the OS, I take a snapshot, you see. The name of that snapshot is the date and what versions. So I could go back and I could see if I move between version 1803 up to date to 1809, then the DLL has disappeared on my systems, on my virtual machines. So that is not in line with what Microsoft says, but in any case, I was able to test on that system that although the DLL is present, it is not used. It's the font driver host.
So other workarounds, they say disable preview pane and details pane. I guess
Windows
that
Explorer.
That sort of prevents some accidental exploitation or something gets previewed. Wouldn't really prevent anything like if you load a web page with a bad font in Explorer, Windows Explorer, sorry, Internet Explorer or Edge, it would probably still be exploited, or?
I think there is that risk. I'm not sure exactly. For Windows Explorer, there it is clear. You can have such a file, a font file in a folder, and when you preview it with a preview pane, then it has to be rendered. So the exploit can execute. But on the other systems, like on the other applications like Internet Explorer, I'm not sure about that. Because it would involve, of course, that the font is downloaded together with the HTML of the page to be rendered.
Right, I'm thinking about something, you know, you had to find a custom font or something like this with a style sheet and download like a malicious font. Maybe that would be possible. And then it's probably no user interaction involved, kind of, in that scenario. Disable web client service, really also just a little workaround to make it less likely to be exploited.
Yeah, indeed, less likely.
So, any guesses on the patch? Next patch Tuesday, and
I expect it to be next patch Tuesday because Microsoft says, okay, it is mitigated in the current versions of Windows 10, and that's what they focus on. So I don't expect an out-of-band patch.
And Windows 7 is vulnerable, so unless you have the extended update service, you will remain vulnerable there.
Yes, indeed, you will remain vulnerable.
Well, thanks, and stay safe and healthy.
You too, Johannes.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
See you.